I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safer.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 413. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. Pastor John Bennett will be joining us in just a moment. For those of you who are new to the show, welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us. Hope you will stick around for more Armed Lutheran Radio goodness next week. Hope you'll go and check the back catalog for all the almost 9 years of Armed Lutheran Radio goodness. And for those of you who are longtime and returning listeners, thank you so much for your support. Glad to have you here again. Before we get started with, thought we would talk today a little bit about the presidential ticket, the Democrat ticket of Kamala Harris, but specific and her vice presidential pick, Tim Walz, the current governor of the state of Minnesota, and considering that Pastor Bennett is a citizen, a resident of the state of Minnesota, and has been for a while, thought we would get his take on the presumptive or the vice presidential nominee for the Democrat ticket for 2024. Before we get started, though, I do want to remind you, Armed Lutheran Radio is listener funded. We don't have any advertising. We don't have any sponsors. We rely on the generosity of our members, the members of the Reformation Gun Club, and their annual contributions to help us keep doing what we're doing. And to this week, I want to give a big shout out to people like Dan from South Lyon, Michigan, Melvin from Holt, Missouri, the disreputable Bartlett, Robert from Monroe, Georgia, Keith from Palmyra, Missouri, Luke from Seymour, Indiana, Jerry and Billy from Deer Lodge, Montana, Donnie from White Bear Lake, Minnesota, Mark from Lake Havasu City in Arizona, and Paul from McKinney, Texas. Thank you all so much for your support, and thank you to all of the members of the Reformation Gun Club. Folks, if you would like to join them, if you would like to see this craziness continue, if you'd like to put your money where your mouth is and help us continue to do what we do, for just $36 a year, you get access to hundreds of hours of exclusive content, cool Armed Lutheran swag, and invitations to our monthly online hangouts, the next of which is coming up here in a couple of weeks. At the end, I think the last week of August. So visit reformationgunclub.com for more information and to sign up today. We would love to have you join us. All right, Pastor John Bennett, the Pistol Packin' Padre, is with us. Welcome back, Pastor.
Thank you, Lord. Good to be back.
It is great to have you back with us. What I thought we would do today, as you are a citizen of the great state of Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, and since Vice President Cackles has selected your governor as her running mate, what I thought we would do is take a look at who this guy, Tim Walz, is. Most people probably have never heard of him prior to his selection. I mean, most people, to be honest, most Americans probably don't even know the governors of their own states, much less the governors. But unless these people are running for higher office, as Walz is, or like Ron DeSantis was, or if they're, manifestly corrupt like Gavin Newsom, or just embroiled in some embarrassing, stupid controversy like, what's her name, Governor Noem in South Dakota, you probably haven't heard of or pay attention to the governors of the states that you don't live in.
Right.
So I want to I want to try to avoid some of the salacious stuff about Walz as much as we can, because that's all out there, and that's, I think, in some cases might be getting into the Eighth Commandment territory of, gossip. So I want to stick to what we absolutely know about him, get a little bit about his background, what his policies have been like for Minnesotans like you, and what we might expect from him on the national stage. Major policies, stuff like life and trans issues and guns and the size and power of government, because there are some things that I think Americans should be worried about, given some of his policy and some of the things he's done as governor of your state. So who is this guy? What did he do before becoming governor? Where did this guy come from?
Well, aside from the very pits of hell itself, he was a teacher in Mankato, which is just about 30 miles away from me. He started the first gay lesbian alliance chapter at the school where he was teaching. So, and that was back in the 90s, when that kind of thing was still considered very scandalous and not mainstream.
Right.
So, yeah, this is a guy that back in the 90s, he's been my congressman. Thank God he's not anymore, but he just moved on to a more powerful position where he can screw me over as the governor. Minnesota is depending on which figure they take, some rank it even higher, but most put us at the 6th highest state in the country for income tax.
Oh.
There have been years where I pay, I'll have to pay about the same as my federal refund to the state of Minnesota for my taxes. The offset, how often is it that you end up paying significantly more in taxes to the state you live in than the federal government? Usually it's the other way around.
Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah, there's that. COVID was a nightmare under him. This is a guy who had established a hotline where you can rat out your neighbors if you thought they were violating his stay-at-home order.
Yeah. All right, let's get into some of that, because that's where I think, he's been presented as sort of this Minnesota nice kind of guy, but if you dig, and you don't really have to dig very deep to find out that characterization is not even close to accurate.
No.
Now, you alluded before you made the joke, you joked about the stolen valor stuff before we got started off air, but he did serve, 24 years, I think it was, in the National Guard. There's all this debate about whether he left his unit to run for Congress because he knew he was going to be deployed to Iraq. I think we get into there's some argument about that gets into Eighth Commandment stuff. But what we can say about the guy that speaks to his character is that it seems like he has often presented himself either through some verbal sleight of hand as someone who served overseas and perhaps in a combat zone when he did not. Is that correct?
Right.
I think we can safely say that without actually, because we have recordings of him talking about guns that like the ones that he carried in war, and there was something else where he was on one of the Sunday shows, I think it was, and he made a comment about how he didn't correct the interviewer's characterization of him as having been part of a unit that served in Iraq, which made it sort of sound like he was part of that unit doing things that unit had actually done after he was gone.
Well, and he also was, I forget the exact rank he was assigning himself. I think it was like Combat Master First Class or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Or Combat Master Sergeant First Class. But after his retirement, he was stripped of that title and demoted because he never saw combat.
Ah, okay.
But yet he was still claiming that rank, claiming, he was the highest ranking person who served in the armed forces that was in the House and all this other nonsense. And, it's...
When he was a congressman, he won fairly handily most of the time he was running for office, right? I mean, 2006 and 2008, like he had over 60 or 53% of the vote in 2006 and then 62 in 2008. And it started to kind of drop off as the further along he went. How long did he serve in Congress?
I can't remember for the life of me.
Let me look.
I think it was he served until 2016.
Yeah. He won by just 0.07%, looks like, in 2016, because his district was very red, very Trumpy, it says.
Well, and he tried to pass himself off as this, moderate a moderate Democrat, that, he wasn't this radical liberal, that, he was a hunter and, one of the good old boys who served in the military and all this other stuff. But, sadly, the way it works in most of the country is that people will elect somebody and pay very little attention to what they're actually doing once they're in office.
Oh, yeah.
At least when it comes to positions like Congress. How many people out there know how their congressman voted on a particular issue, or even who know who their congressman is?
Right.
So his record was so horrific that people finally caught on. People noticed, because turns out he was voting with the radical liberals every single chance that he got.
So he was your congressman. What was his district like in general? Was it rural? Was it urban? Was it a mix of the two? Was it?
It's extremely rural.
Okay.
I would say 75% of the towns that are in the district are 5,000 people or less.
Gotcha.
Most, a large rural, my zip code falls into the local town here. I'm 7.5 miles from town, and it's a town of only about 350 people.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's pretty characteristic for this part of Minnesota.
Right. But he didn't.
Go ahead.
But he didn't serve in the same way you would expect someone from that kind of a district. He didn't vote that way in Congress, I'm guessing, from what you were saying.
No.
Okay.
He tried to promote himself as pro-farmer, pro-traditional values. Even tried to pass himself off as pro-gun to get himself elected, but he sure didn't vote that way. He's well, and you've heard the audio clips that came out shortly after he was announced. How hey, one man's socialism is another person's neighborliness, or whatever.
Right.
That this guy is a hardcore communist. He believes that the government should be running absolutely every little aspect of your life.
And that gets us to his actions as governor, I think. That's a great segue to that, because, like I said, he wins in 2016 his last run in Congress by just 0.07% of that little rural district. And I guess he probably thinks, if I try this again in 2018, I may not win. So he goes and he runs for governor in 2018. How did he present himself to the state as when he was running for governor the first time? Did he still stick with that aw shucks small town appeal kind of thing, or did he change to appeal to the metro areas?
he still kind of tried to pass himself off as that, aw shucks, down home country boy, which he is not.
Mm-hmm.
And but at the same time, making it clear that his official positions were quite liberal.
Okay.
So it was
all things
Minnesota
to all
is
people.
the only state who did not vote for Reagan when he ran for re-election.
Okay.
That and DC, but I think DC is over the very center of hell itself. The way that it is the most isolated of the United States.
This is true.
So, yeah, he's and he came from this, representing this rural area. And then once he's governor and he's pissing and moaning about how the people in the rural areas votes, he refers to, that area, that's mostly just rocks and cows. And he used those literal words, rocks and cows, to refer to the area that he had formerly represented in Congress.
Nice.
All of the rural areas of Minnesota. So, yeah. That shows you the kind of disdain this guy has for your average rural person living in Minnesota.
Interesting. So 2020, 2021 comes along. We get the COVID mess. How did he handle that, the COVID response in Minnesota?
It was horrific. Just to kind of give you an overview of this guy, he tries to mirror the policies of Gavin Newsom, even in some cases trying to outdo Gavin Newsom in his policies. When it came to COVID, everything was so draconian. Minnesota was just as bad as places like California, as far as the executive orders, that kind of thing. So churches were prohibited from gathering, in worship. He declared Minnesota's largest candy store to be an essential business in the midst of all that. Yes. So he ordered restaurants and bars and all those kinds of places shut down. Liquor stores were still listed as essential businesses. Grocery stores, you can still go to Walmart. Hardware stores, you can still go to Menards. But then he also declared Minnesota's largest candy store an essential business. Turns out the candy store is owned by his longtime personal friend and mega donor. And the owner's son is the governor's personal attorney.
Nice.
But meanwhile, churches, you're not allowed to gather and worship. Restaurants, you still have to stay shuttered. If you don't have enough savings, I guess you're just going to go under. Too bad for you. He even, through his DOJ, had a woman arrested and thrown in jail. She ended up getting sentenced to a year in prison for daring to open up her restaurant because her employees weren't getting a paycheck. She wasn't making any money. She was going to go under. So he had her arrested.
Unbelievable.
Yes. So that's, yeah.
And you started talking about one of the things, the other things he did was this snitch hotline that he created.
Yes. So, yeah, I know I have at least one person who lives in this vicinity who would have loved to rat me out and to rat out the church. It's interesting how somebody like Trump gets elected and you don't realize just how radically liberal some people are. Sadly, the person was a member of the church. I think they're still on the books, but have never transferred their membership. That's neither here nor there. But anyway, he had this hotline where you could rat people out. Now, we ended up, and if I had to do it all over again, we would not have closed down whatsoever. But we didn't have in-person worship for 6 weeks. We went back to it before the governor gave his blessing for churches to reopen. I happen to have the phone number for one of our sheriff deputies because he used to live just down the road from here. And he said, no, our position at the sheriff's department is it's our duty to protect your constitutional rights, not infringe upon them. So if you want to worship, you go right ahead. We're not going to do anything about it. However, if a person had wanted to rat us out, the governor, through his executive orders could have prosecuted the church for violating his stay-at-home order. I don't know if there were any churches that were prosecuted, but this is also the same time. Now, this kind of also gives you a little bit of insight into the mind of Tampon Tim. Sorry. I hope that doesn't offend any of the tender sensibilities of our listeners.
After all they've heard for 9 years, I seriously doubt it.
Yeah. So, heck, where was I going with that? I don't remember what I was going to say now. Anyway. Insight into the mind of the governor of Minnesota.
Right.
So before he gave his blessing for churches to return to worshiping together in person, our local Missouri Synod district for Minnesota, in conjunction with leaders of Roman Catholic diocese, sent the governor a letter, said, we are going to violate your order whether you like it or not. Try and stop us, and we will sue you for infringing upon our constitutional liberties. And
awesome.
Yes, and lo and behold, within a matter of days, well, you guys can go back to church now.
Everything's fine.
Yes.
So that was my next question that I was going to ask was, how did churches react to this? You said you guys stopped doing in-person for 6 weeks and then decided to return to in-person worship before you even had permission. I hate even putting that in the sentence, but permission from the state to go back to church.
Right.
How did other churches, how did LCMS or otherwise that you know of, how did they respond to this? I know you probably heard from other pastors around the area and in your district. How were they grappling with all of this?
Well, most churches, most pastors that I know kind of did that same time frame, anywhere between 4 and 8 weeks. It's supposed to be 6 weeks to slow the spread.
Right.
So we decided, 6 weeks, we'll see what happens during that time. Was doing a full worship service with my family, basically serving as the congregation. We would record the services in the sanctuary, put them on Facebook and so forth. Was doing communion by private appointment for people. That basically was what my week consisted of, was just a bunch of appointments for private communion. But there were other churches that did not respond this way. And it's interesting, though, it seems to be those churches that are of the liberal bent were the ones who were more willing to succumb to the tyranny of our governor. I had a family that they used to attend here, but it was 40 miles from home. There was an ELCA church in town, and it just happened to be where the wife's parents attended. And this was, 5-6 months later, they came to visit the church and said, it's been however many months that was since we've had worship services.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And so
even after the governor gave his blessing to go back, they still stayed away.
Well, they started having, 3 months in, they started having outdoor worship services, but no communion. You had to social distance, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
There were, and that basically was run of the mill for your average liberal churches. I heard this about Methodist churches in the area. I don't know about Episcopalians, but pretty much Baptists, Lutherans, and Catholics were like, screw this, we're having worship.
Yeah. And he was very slow to get the schools back in session, wasn't he?
Yes. So the whole next year, there were many schools that were doing distance learning only, or remote learning, as they call it.
Right.
We went back to, we had the school that my wife teaches. We had remote learning for the rest of that school year, but then they said the heck with it. we're having in-person learning, and we actually gained families from the public school because we had in-person learning and the public school did not.
Yeah, that was, so I'm guessing Governor Walz is a big fan of the teachers' unions, I would guess.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. He is bought and paid for by the teachers' unions.
What do you have up there, AFT or NEA?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think it's the NEA.
Either way, it's sort of six of one, half dozen of the other. But
they're just one big agglomeration when it comes down to it.
Then in 2022, we get the police killing of George Floyd and the subsequent riots. How did Governor Walz handle the response to all of that unrest?
Let it burn. That was his attitude. And the National Guard had asked him if he wanted them to mobilize, and he had them hold off. He handled it very much the way that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats and the Capitol Police handled the whole January 6th thing. That he waited till it was way out of control before he did anything. You had Minneapolis burning to the ground before he mobilized the National Guard. And then he bragged about how he had such a swift response. I think one of the most heartbreaking scenes that I saw in the news footage, there was a firefighter who had taken his entire retirement savings, everything that he had set aside, his life savings, to buy a sports bar. And that sports bar was shuttered because of COVID. And because he hadn't opened yet, he hadn't taken out insurance on the building. And here his building is burning to the ground. You've got a news crew interviewing him in front of his sports bar. And you have people dragging the safe out of his building while it burns. And these were the same thugs that say, well, they've got insurance, it's okay. And here's a black business owner, his life savings going up in flames because of our governor.
And didn't the governor say something stupid about understanding understanding what the protesters, their point of view, or something like that? It wasn't just stand back and let it happen. It was also an expression of, like, we understand why you're upset kind of thing, which happened around the country. But didn't Walz do the same sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely. It was kind of, if you remember the Baltimore riots where was it Muriel Bowser? Was that the name of the mayor? Was give them room to burn. That was his attitude. And he talked about how he sympathized with the black community, and he sympathized with the people who are angry, and they're angry and their anger is justified, and therefore their actions are somehow justified. Of course, you had cackling Kamala bailing out the rioters in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. Was Walz at all involved in any way with the push to prosecute the police officer?
I'm not certain of that. If I had to put money on it, I'd be betting 10-1 odds he did.
Throw him under the bus. And
of course, they didn't have it. They didn't have the case taken up by the DA for the city of Minneapolis. They had it taken up by Keith Ellison, the Attorney General. Sorry, I couldn't think of the term there for a second. The Attorney General for the state of Minnesota.
So that would that not have been at the governor's behest, or did he have the independent ability to do that?
That's usually how it works. The governor, the governor usually has the attorney general do his bidding, and we see that at the federal level as well.
Right.
So I don't know for certain. I haven't looked anything up to that extent, but it would not be surprising to me in the least bit if he had directed Keith Ellison to take the lead on the prosecution of Derek Chauvin.
So we have his first term marked by government overreach, encouraging citizens to spy on each other, clamping down on businesses and putting people out of business, then supporting essentially the rioters after the George Floyd incident. What was his second term like? He runs for re-election in 22. He wins by essentially the same margin, it looks like 52 to 44 when I think he got 53 his first run. What's his second term been like since re-election in 22?
So his second term, you have to keep in mind his first term, he did not have the state house and Senate under control of Democrats.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember. I believe the House was, but the state was controlled, or the Senate was controlled by Republicans. But they only had like a 1 or 2 vote majority. But 2022 comes along, and Democrats have a majority in both the House and Senate. And that's when we get things like this transgender policy of protecting anyone seeking transgender care in the state of Minnesota. It's been called the quote-unquote sanctuary state for transgender medicine for even minors. So we've got that. We've got him vetoing a Born Alive bill that would have required medical attention to be given to children that survive abortions. With the Dobbs decision, passed a bill that pretty much enshrines abortion in the state constitution and allowing it up until the point of birth.
Jeez.
Yes. So, there was, when he won his re-election, there was that video clip that you've probably seen. I'm sure many of our listeners have seen, where he said, I was so radical on abortion, Nancy Pelosi told me to tone it down, and we still won, bragging about his record on abortion. So he's one of the most radical governors in the nation, and now he's on the VP ticket.
Yikes. How does he, in your mind, we'll get to guns here in a minute, but how does he compare, based on what you know of some of the other radicals around the country, the Pritzkers, the Hochul, what's her name in
New York,
in Michigan.
Whitmer's the one in Michigan.
Gavin Newsom and that bunch. Where does he rank in that triumvirate of in that group, or pantheon, I should say, of lefty governors?
This might seem a little hard to believe, but I would rank him as being more radical than Gavin Newsom.
Oh, wow.
When you look at his policies, it's the only thing that's keeping him from going full retard is you never go full retard.
Never
if you get
go
the movie
full
reference. You should get the movie reference. Anyway, if you don't get the movie reference, you need to go watch Tropic Thunder.
Yes, absolutely.
That's right. But he's, for example, with the pushing the transgenderism, that is something that even Gavin Newsom kind of backed down a little bit from, with the transgender medicine for children kind of stuff. He kind of backed down from that a little bit. I forgot to mention this too, that Walz was attempting, I don't remember if he succeeded in this. It's one of those things that so much radical BS is happening in the state that you kind of lose track of what radical things have and have not happened. But he had
Which is part of the plan, by the way. I mean,
right.
right? Just inundate you with so much stuff that you don't know which way to fight.
It's to push you to the point where you're just numb and just like, whatever, I don't care anymore. He wanted to have pedophilia protected so that people that, and I forget how it was phrased, but essentially under, sexual orientations, to slide pedophilia in there as a sexual orientation.
Minor attracted persons or something.
Right. So, he was pushing that. So that's the governor of Minnesota.
So he's to the left of Kamala.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure. On
that'd be a close one.
left to right, they may be very well on the same point, because you have to remember she was also rated the most radical
that's right.
senator while she was serving as senator. It's
so that makes them the most radical ticket ever to run for president.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, and this may sound strange because it seems like every time she is not in front of a teleprompter, it just turns into a word salad. But it may be because she might be a little more politically shrewd than Walz, of not bragging about her policy positions or pretending that she never had. You've seen the shift on the border. Now she's pretending like she's some sort of border hawk, even though when she was running in the 2020 primary, she was talking about abolishing ICE and closing down detention centers and leaving the border wide open for anyone who's quote unquote nonviolent.
Right. And you've got to wonder how much of that was just positioning herself, because in the primaries you run to the base, and then when you run for office, for the higher office, you run to the middle. So it makes you wonder if she is truly that radical. But then again, like you said, she was bailing out rioters and raising money to bail out rioters during BLM. So she probably is that radical. Right. Let's get to guns next. Before we talk about Walz's policies, what is, in your time in Minnesota, how long have you lived in Minnesota now?
19 years.
19 years. So what has gun culture and gun rights been like in Minnesota over your time there?
So Minnesota, it's kind of like a roller coaster. If you go back to 2006, Minnesota became a shall issue state for concealed carry permits.
Okay.
So that's, Minnesota, deep red or deep blue Minnesota, the only state that never voted for Reagan, that they it's weird. So you have that getting passed, and you have some restrictions, like you have to get a permit to purchase a handgun or a quote unquote assault rifle.
Oh, that's right. Kind of like North Carolina's pistol purchase permit system, where
it's like that. If you have a permit to carry, it kind of overrides that. Mm-hmm. The permit to purchase is good for 1 year and it's free. The permit to carry is like $100 and good for 5 years or something like that.
Do the local sheriffs approve the pistol purchase thing, or is that done at the state level?
It's done at the local sheriff's level, and they are required with the permit to purchase. I think they are required to approve it within 1 week, and with the permit to carry, it's like 2 weeks. But our sheriff's department here for this county is pretty darn good. I think the last time I applied for a renewal of my permit, I think I got it within less than a week. It's interesting though, because the county sheriff, the former county sheriff, was opposed to the right to carry bill, but the current sheriff is all for it. So it's just one of those things that varies county by county, but it is a shall issue state. At the same time, though, you have the Twin Cities area, which seems to dominate political decisions that are made in this state.
Right.
Where they have been pushing, anytime there's a shooting anywhere in the country, just like the national politicians, it happens here in Minnesota, where they're ramping up their language of going after guns. So, and this is something that's kind of interesting. So Walz used to have an A rating from the NRA.
Really?
He did. While he was serving as our local congressman, he had an A rating. So he kind of kept his mouth shut about gun stuff when he was supporting a bunch of farmers in the Rocks and Cows area.
Right. But once he got his hands on the wheels of... You're right.
Yes. So the NRA downgraded him to an F when he was running in 2018 to be the governor.
Wow. That's quite the fall from grace.
Yes. So in 2016, he still received that A rating, and then 2 years later, he has an F. So it tells you where his position was all along.
Mm-hmm.
He just was kind of hiding it so that he didn't get any flack from the people that he was representing, who he was hoping would be stupid enough to reelect him.
So in order to keep his seat and keep Democrats in power, he went along with, he was probably allowed to vote against certain things or vote present on certain gun control things and keep his head down basically when he was in Congress. Once he got to the governor's mansion and had his hands on the levers of state government, then he could actually do what he wanted to with guns. And what sort of changes came along once he became governor?
Well, to back up just a bit, after I believe he made the decision to not seek re-election for Congress when he won so narrowly in 2016, because after that, immediately after that, he starts voting lockstep with Democrats on guns. Before that, he didn't. So I believe that he figured, you know what, I got my eyes on the governor's office now because I'm not going to be able to win re-election in this area.
Right.
So he went whole hog in on gun control. He opposed legislation to permit gun silencers, what he calls gun silencers, suppressors. It was like the Safe Ears Act or something like that.
Right.
If you remember that, it was like 2016, 2017.
Safe Hearing Act, maybe, or...
Yeah, I think something like that. That would have basically...
Was it going to take the suppressors off the NFA?
Right. Precisely. Okay. So that you didn't have to pay that $200 tax stamp in order to get, because it makes it unaffordable for... I'm not going to burn $200 to get a can. I'm sorry. I'm not. Well, not $200 for the permission to own a can.
The permission,
and then depending on what you get, it's $800 to $1,200, even higher than that, depending on the brand.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, he is in favor of red flag laws, which shouldn't be a surprise. He pushes for bans on semi-automatic weapons.
Do you have red flag? Do you have the red flag protection orders in Minnesota?
I'm not sure if we do or not. I don't believe we do yet.
Okay.
And I say yet because I'm an optimist. It's
right.
A pessimist says it can't get any worse, and an optimist says you bet it can. Yeah.
What about universal background checks? That's the great fix all for Democrats. They seem to think that will solve all of our problems.
He's all for it.
Of course. Do you have have you Has he passed anything like that in Minnesota?
I don't believe so. Well, here, let me take a look. This is 2023. Oh, that is right. They did pass red flag measures. I forgot about that. Again, it's that inundate you with a bunch of decisions that attack your liberties, and eventually you're like, well, I didn't notice that one. So it does, yep, universal background checks for private party transfers of pistols and semi-automatic weapons. A background check is not required for a private transfer of a hunting rifle or between immediate family members. Red flag laws are part of it. Yep.
So that was just, what, last year?
This
last
says
year or this
May
session?
of 2023, so that was just last year.
Wow.
And now that I'm reading this, I do remember that got passed. So,
okay, so that doesn't speak well for what might come, were he to get closer to the White House. You got to imagine that if he and Kamala are if they win, this kind of stuff is coming down the pike. It's coming down the pike no matter who wins. The Democrats are going to try to push it, but these two, I mean, Harris has talked about, confiscation and, or mandatory buybacks, which is basically confiscation.
right.
So that doesn't speak well for what might be headed our way if these two end up in office.
People don't like the doom and gloom prophecies, but I'm of the firm belief that if the Harris-Walz ticket wins in November, that it's going to be very, very difficult for our nation to recover.
All right. Well, Pastor, thanks you for taking the time to do this. And sorry you've had to put up with Tim Walz as your governor for 5 years.
It is what it is.
6 years or whatever it's been now.
Yeah. I mean, I jokingly say, well, there's worse places I could live, but the number of those places that are worse than this are getting fewer and fewer. I would much rather live in a place like South Dakota.
Yeah. Governor Noem may be weird, but
yeah.
But at least you know where she stands on the issues.
Right. But don't, if you have any dogs, you might want to keep your distance.
Yeah, if they're barking, loud barking dogs, just
or
maybe.
ornery goats.
And with that, I think that we'll wrap it up, folks. If you have any comments or any questions, if you have any thoughts about the this nonsense that we just went through, you want to share your opinion of the vice presidential nominee and the ticket, the Harris-Walz ticket, or anything else, visit our feedback page, armedlutheran.us/feedback, and leave us a message. We would love to hear from you. Let's see, we've got 2 more weeks in the month, so probably won't be next week that we'll do the online hangout. We'll schedule that a little bit in advance to give everybody a chance to sign up and come. I get to do jury duty at the end of the month. Oh yay!
Oh, fun.
But we'll try to do the online hangout before that, and so. Tune in next time for more Armed Lutheran Radio nonsense. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio. a member of the Self Defense Radio Network.